This week we studied a portion of Beahalotcha in the book of Numbers, beginning with chapter 8. Towards the end of the portion, in chapter 12, we read about Miriam speaking inappropriately about Moshe, her own younger brother, God turning to Miriam and rebuking her. How dare she speak about Moshe, especially that Moshe is the most humble man from all the men on the face of the earth. He then punishes Miriam with the tzara'at, an affliction of leprosy, and order Miriam to stay outside the Jewish camp, be secluded by herself for 7 days. The Torah then concludes the story with relating that the Jewish people remained in their camp for 7 days while Miriam was secluded outside the camp, and only upon her return back to the camp they continue on their journey. The Medrash tells us that the reason the Jewish people showed that honor to Miriam and not continue on their journey while she was outside the camp is because there is a term in Judaism called measure for measure, midah keneged midah, and Miriam, when she was younger, she stood by while Moshe was placed in a basket in the Nile as a baby. She spent 1 hour watching what will happen to him, and therefore God rewarded her that later on, for 7 days, the Jewish people waited for Miriam to be cured from the leprosy and return back to the camp, and that took 7 days. The Lubavitch Rebbe is asking 2 questions. The first question is, measure for measure means that the reward is similar to the effort. Here, Miriam spent only 1 hour, yet the reward was 7 days. It doesn't seem to be a measure for measure. The second question that I was asking is that when Miriam spent 1 hour at the Nile, it seems that she was there to save his life. We call it pikuach nefesh. It's one of the greatest mitzvot and obligations for a human being. Yet the reward had nothing to do with saving a life. It was only honor and respect so that they should not travel while she was secluded and outside the camp. The Rebbe explains in the following way the whole story. The Rebbe says that by Miriam watching her young brother, she wasn't there to save his life. How do we know? Because the text reads, Vatitatzav achoto merachok. Merachok translates to from a distance. In other words, she wasn't there to save his life, just to watch what will happen. Then Pharaoh's daughter arrives. She hears a baby crying. She extends her hand, her arm, or sends a maiden, one of her maidservants, and they open up the basket and they see a young baby crying. Pharaoh's daughter tried to feed him and hire many wet nurses to feed the baby, and he refused. And then Miriam comes over, pops from nowhere, and tells the Pharaoh's daughter, maybe he's a Hebrew child. Can I bring you a wet nurse from the Jewish people that might help? And Pharaoh's daughter agrees. Miriam summons her mother, the mother of the baby, Yocheved. Yocheved feeds the baby, and the baby is quiet and he is calm. Says the Rebbe that Miriam's act was there only hastening the calming of Moshe. Because Pharaoh's daughter was looking for someone to feed the baby to calm him down. She had mercy. She couldn't stand the baby crying, so she was looking for someone to feed him. Obviously, eventually she would have turned to a Jewish wet nurse to find a way to calm the baby. Miriam's interference here was only to make it happen sooner. So the pain of Moshe, a baby crying, would have stopped a little bit sooner than would have in a natural way. For that, God rewarded Miriam in a way that's very similar. Because by Jewish law, a person who is afflicted with tzara'at, with leprosy, must remain outside the Jewish camp. Now, if there is no Jewish camp, they cannot fulfill the 7-day stay in seclusion outside the camp, because staying outside the camp is part of the cure and the repentance. And before returning back, they must be outside a Jewish camp for 7 days. If they would be traveling, Miriam would travel along, but she would not be considered, would not be able to count those days as part of the 7 days of seclusion, because that those days there was no Jewish camp and camping in one location. And therefore God rewarded Miriam by hastening the cure, by causing Miriam to spend 7 straight days, in which after she was able to return back to the camp, and only then they journeyed. And that was the measure for measure. Just like she stood from far, and when she felt the need, she called the mother and hastened the coming and the pain to make sure the pain is gone for Moshe. God also, requiring Miriam to spend 7 days outside camp, hasten those 7 days by making sure no one travels and the camp is stood in its own place, so she is able to fulfill that obligation as part of the cure, so that she is returning 7 days later into the Jewish camp. And that's an important lesson for measure for measure. Thank you very much.